Chaffetz.
Thank the Chairman. We'll have to get you such a shirt. You'll enjoy it. Mr. Bean, you're obviously a very accomplished individual. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in a small town in Iowa.
Oh, very good. And at some point, I'm sure you'll look towards retirement way in the future. Do you have any idea where you might retire?
I went to foggiest.
My guess is it's probably not in Utah, right?
Utah is a great place. I'd consider it.
No, well, thank you. I guess one of the things that we're concerned about is, Utahns feel like they live there. They've lived there for generations. They will live there in the future. They want what's best for the land, and wildlife is part of that. Why is it that there's so much resistance to taking state data and information under consideration when you're making these types of decisions?
Respectfully, sir, I don't think there is much resistance to taking state data. I think the Fish and Wildlife Service routinely uses information from the states in making its decisions.
We don't feel like that in Utah, quite frankly. Let me ask you this: the 2010 decision by Fish and Wildlife Service that the greater sage grouse warrants an ESA listing was based, as I understand it, on a 2009 taxpayer-funded Fish and Wildlife Service study. This study was cited 62 times in the listing decision, yet the data used in this study has still not been made publicly available. Do I have that right?
I don't know whether you have it right or not. I do know, as a general matter, that some of the underlying data for studies that the Fish and Wildlife Service relies upon is not publicly available.
Why not?
Because as I understand it, because the researchers who collected that data have it as a proprietary source of data.
How isn't that patently unfair? You're making a decision that affects people's lives and dramatically affects their way of living, and they can't see it?
Well, sir, the decision made in 2010 was not a decision to list the species. It had no effect upon anyone's life. There will be a decision forthcoming about whether to list.
It's going to be part of the decision-making process, is it not?
Well, there will be a decision made in 2015 on the sage grouse.
And they're going to rely upon some of that data, right?
Well, I don't know.
But why can't we look at it? Why taxpayers paid for it?
It's not as though the Fish and Wildlife Service is withholding it. The Fish and Wildlife Service doesn't have it to give, as I understand.
Who paid for it?
I honestly don't know.
The taxpayers. Taxpayers paid for it. Why can't we see the information? It's not about some North Korea nuclear bomb that the military is. We're talking about data that should be made publicly available.
Sir, I can tell you that I am currently aware that the Fish and Wildlife Service is working quite closely with the State of Utah. Mr. John Harjaw, representing Governor Herbert, is involved on a regular basis in dialogue with respect to Utah's efforts to protect the sage grouse, and any information from Utah or other sources relevant to whether that species should be listed will be fully taken into account by the service. I can assure you of that.
It seems to be a one-way street, and it shouldn't be. We've spent time with Mr. Harjaw. He's a very good, talented individual. I don't feel like there's a good two-way communication. This is a taxpayer-funded study with data and information that we should be able to review and challenge. That's part of the open and transparent process where we're ultimately going to make some sort of decision. I'm running short of time here. I really don't understand the philosophy behind this. I don't think it's fundamentally fair. I think you're hiding something, and I think it should be made publicly available. And if you would please get back to this committee and try to articulate why you're hiding this information, we can't see it, I would greatly appreciate it, because I really don't understand it. The other part I want to ask about is, for instance, with the prairie dogs, how you count them on public lands but not on private lands, but then if they're deemed to get on the list, then you have to manage them also on the private lands. Well, why? Explain that philosophy to me.
I think the Fish and Wildlife Service recovery plan for the prairie dog relied primarily upon recovering the species on public lands, and that was done, I believe, in part in recognition of the fact that for the most part, private landowners regard the Utah prairie dog as not a desirable thing to have on their lands, and therefore the prospects for recovery really depend upon securing its survival on public lands.
But when you're assessing how endangered they might be, you don't take into account what's on the private property.
Respectfully, sir, I do not think that is correct. I think the Fish and Wildlife Service takes into account all the prairie dogs in assessing whether or not they belong on the list.
All right. Well, that's a question that I would like to further explore with you. My time is expiring here, but I can tell you in general that the good people of Utah, they care deeply about their land. They pass this on from generation to generation. It's highly offensive when we have people who come in and make fundamental decisions about the longevity of the state and don't properly, I think, and take into account the state plans. The state data is not necessarily used with the consistency that we'd like it to. And it seems to be a one-way street, because when we ask for data from the Federal Government in how they're making these decisions before they're finally made, because once they're finally made, it's very difficult, we can't get our hands on that information. And that's the frustration. And it should be an open and collaborative process. I believe the states are in a much better position to draw up the plans,